The dogs woke me first, not the engines. 3 of them, all at once throwing themselves against the porch rail hard enough that I heard wood crack before I heard anything else. It was 3:14 in the morning, and the ranch was dark the way it always was. No streetlights for 6 miles, and through the kitchen window, I watched 4 sets of headlights cut across my pasture in a pattern no delivery truck or lost tourist would ever drive. They were spreading out. I grabbed my father's old 12-gauge from behind the pantry door, the one I'd never fired at anything bigger than a coyote, and by the time I got the porch light on, there were men in black tactical vests fanning across my fence line like they'd rehearsed it. One of them yelled something about a compliance violation. Compliance at 3 in the morning with rifles slung across their chests on land my grandfather cleared by hand in 1961? I told my wife to get our daughter into the storm cellar, and I stood on that porch with a shotgun I hadn't loaded fast enough, and I asked the man closest to me who in God's name sent him. He said the words like they explained everything. HOA Enforcement Division. I didn't know the HOA had one. I didn't know I was even in an HOA. My land had never once in 63 years been inside the boundary of Cedar Hollow Estates, the development 2 miles down the county road where Judith Calloway had appointed herself president 3 summers ago. My wife didn't come out of that cellar for almost 2 hours after the trucks finally pulled off the property, even after I told her 3 times it was safe. My daughter came out sooner, but she came out different, quieter, checking the window latches in her room every night for weeks afterward in a way she'd never done before in her life. I want to be honest that the version of this story where a man stands his ground and everything resolves by morning isn't the true one. The true one is that none of us slept right for a long time, and that fear doesn't leave a house just because the danger technically has. The sheriff's deputy who finally showed up 40 minutes later after I'd already called 3 times looked more nervous standing in my driveway than the armed men had looked storming my fence. He kept glancing at their vehicles, at the Sentinel Compliance Group decal on the side panel like he recognized it and didn't want to say from where. He told me to file a report with the county in the morning, and left before I could ask why 4 armed contractors answered to a homeowners association that governed a development I had no legal connection to. That should have been the end of the strangest night of my life. It wasn't close to it. 3 days later, a truck I didn't recognize sat parked at the tree line past my east pasture for 6 hours without moving. My daughter, 16 and sharper than she has any right to be, filmed it on her phone from the hayloft and noticed something the rest of us missed. A small dish antenna mounted on the truck bed angled at our house, not the road. When I brought it to the sheriff's office, the man behind the desk went quiet, in a way I'd never seen a county employee go quiet, and told me off the record that he couldn't discuss active federal matters. Federal? I hadn't said a word about anyone federal. It took another week and a retired Army buddy who now worked private investigations to explain what I was looking at. Sentinel Compliance Group wasn't a security company. It was 4 men who'd left a private military contractor after a botched job overseas, incorporated in Wyoming, and spent 2 years selling enforcement services to homeowners associations across 3 states. Always the same pitch: aggressive collections for delinquent dues, armed patrols for boundary disputes, intimidation dressed up as compliance. What my buddy found chilled me more than the raid itself. Sentinel was already under a federal wiretap warrant tied to an ATF investigation into unregistered automatic weapons modifications they'd been running out of a warehouse outside Amarillo. The truck at my tree line hadn't been watching me. It had been watching them, and I'd walked straight into the middle of an operation that had been building for 18 months. Judith Calloway, when I finally confronted her at a town meeting, didn't deny sending the men. She stood up in front of 40 of her own neighbors and said my property fell under a pending annexation review, and that Sentinel had simply been exercising due diligence. Nobody in that room had ever heard of a pending annexation review. When I asked to see the paperwork, she said her husband handled the association's legal filings, and he wasn't present that evening. What struck me wasn't her answer so much as how practiced it sounded. The phrasing too smooth for something she was supposedly explaining for the first time. And I remember thinking that a woman defending herself honestly doesn't usually sound rehearsed. A few of the neighbors around me exchanged looks I hadn't expected, quiet and uneasy. The kind people give each other when a question has occurred to more than one person in a room at the same moment. I found out later that at least 2 other families had asked her nearly identical questions about their own dues over the previous year, and been given nearly identical answers. I remembered later that I never once met her husband in the 3 years I'd lived beside that development, and that every official HOA letter I'd received over the years carried a return address for a law office that when I finally drove past, it turned out to be a UPS mailbox store in the next county. The FBI agents who came to my ranch 2 weeks after the raid weren't interested in my shotgun or my fence line at all. They wanted the footage my daughter had taken. Both the truck at the tree line and it turned out 31 seconds of the raid itself that she'd captured from her bedroom window before her card was confiscated by one of the armed men. She'd already backed it up automatically to a cloud account none of them thought to ask about. The lead agent, a quiet woman named Reyes, told me only what she was allowed to, that the annexation records for Cedar Hollow Estates had been altered over a period of years to gradually redraw the association's boundary onto land the HOA had no legal claim to. My ranch among at least 11 other properties across 2 counties. and that dues collected under that fraudulent boundary, along with lines filed against families who refused to pay, had been funneled through shell accounts registered to Judith's husband, Roy Marsh, a man who did not officially work for the HOA in any capacity and therefore had never appeared on a single piece of paperwork I'd ever received. What broke the case wasn't my footage, though it helped. It was Roy Marsh himself, 3 weeks after the raid, walking into the federal building in the state capitol and asking for a deal before his own wife could find out he'd done it. He'd been skimming from Sentinel's contract payments for over a year, funneling money into accounts Judith didn't know existed. And when he realized the ATF's weapons investigation was going to expose the entire annexation scheme, regardless of what he did, he decided his best chance was to be the one who explained it first. His testimony connected 11 falsified annexation filings, 4 county land records employees who'd been paid to look the other way, and a private contractor group that had, by the time it was shut down, forced 3 families off land they legally owned, and collected close to $400,000 in dues from properties that were never part of any homeowners association at all. Judith Calloway was not arrested in a neighborhood meeting or embarrassed in front of her cul-de-sac. She was indicted on federal wire fraud and conspiracy charges alongside her husband, and the case against her, when it finally went to trial 14 months later, wasn't really about me at all. I was witness number 6 of 19. Sitting in that courtroom, watching prosecutors lay out spreadsheets and shell account transfers on a screen for a jury that had never heard of Cedar Hollow Estates, I understood for the first time just how small my own 3-out AM had actually been inside all of it. Roy Marsh testified for 6 days. Judith never took the stand at all, and her lawyer's closing argument that she simply trusted her husband's paperwork and never asked hard questions was the same excuse I'd heard her give me in that town meeting, dressed up in better clothes. The forfeiture order that followed didn't just void my dues or clear my land title, though it did both. It unwound every fraudulent annexation the association had filed since 2019, restoring boundary lines to 11 separate properties, and forcing Cedar Hollow Estates into court-ordered dissolution. Families who'd quietly paid liens for years they never legally owed received restitution checks that for some of them were the first acknowledgement anyone in power had ever given that they'd been telling the truth. Sentinel Compliance Group no longer exists. Its 4 founders are scattered across 3 separate federal facilities on charges that have nothing to do with homeowners associations at all. Judith is serving 7 years. Roy, for his cooperation, is serving 2. The land my grandfather cleared is still mine, the way it always should have been. But I keep the porch light on every night now, and some nights I still hear engines that aren't there. My daughter still checks the window latches, though less often than she used to, and I've stopped correcting her when she does. Some fights end when the other side loses. This one ended when the whole structure holding her up collapsed underneath her, and none of us, including her, ever saw the size of it until it was gone.